16. Amy Adamson. Even the most experienced hikers make mistakes from time to time, and without the proper equipment, they're no more immune to the dangers of the great outdoors than anyone else. 47-year-old Amy Adamson made the fatal error of forgetting to bring bear spray when she set out for a hike in Yellowstone National Park during the summer of 2023. Adamson was visiting the park from Kansas when she went on the ill-fated excursion along Buttermilk Trail outside West Yellowstone, Montana. At around 8 o'clock that morning, a fellow hiker found her fatally mauled body not far from where her hike began. She had wounds consistent with the bear attack and had most likely crossed paths with a grizzly. Wildlife expert Tom Smith, who specializes in human-bear conflicts, told the US Mirror that the grizzly likely killed Amy in 3 minutes or less. Based on what he knows about these encounters, he theorized that the bear most likely went for Amy's head and neck with its large and sharp teeth, which is what the creatures are instinctively programmed to do in response to a perceived threat. Smith said it was unlikely that the bear tried to eat the woman because it's unnatural for them to feast on humans, and that the large mammal probably stopped attacking and walked away after realizing that Amy was not a threat. But bears are incredibly massive and strong, and it doesn't take much for one to fatally harm a human. In other words, by that point, the damage was done. Smith cautioned that it's wise for a person to avoid ending up in a situation like Amy's at all costs, stating in his own words, "There's no tissue on the human body that can resist the pressure of a bear bite." The attack happened just a few hundred yards from nearby homes and camping sites, according to park officials, who closed the area out of an abundance of caution while they investigated the tragedy. As it turned out, the 10-year-old female grizzly who killed Amy had broken into a house in Idaho 3 years earlier and attacked the homeowner. 2 months after Amy's death, the bear broke into another house and was killed by wildlife officials. 5. Rachel Morin. 37-year-old mother of 5 Rachel Morin vanished in early August 2023 after leaving around 6 p.m. to go for a run on the Morin Park Trail in Bel Air, Maryland. When she failed to return after several hours, her boyfriend reported her missing and a search effort immediately got underway. Rachel's car was located at the trailhead, but she was nowhere in sight. After searching for more than a day, a team of volunteers found her murdered along the trail. Suspicion initially fell on Rachel's boyfriend, Richard Tobin. Their relationship had recently become Facebook official, and people were quick to point out that Tobin has a past, which he doesn't deny. But he's insisted from day one that he had nothing to do with Rachel's murder and was ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing. Within weeks of Rachel's death, more than 600 tips poured in from around the country and the world. Unfortunately, none of them panned out. Later that month, authorities in Los Angeles County, California confirmed the DNA left behind by a home invasion suspect earlier in the year turned up as a match to the DNA of Rachel's killer. Law enforcement released surveillance footage of the suspect, but nobody came forward to identify the man in the video, even after Harford County, Maryland Sheriff Jeff Garler urged the public to take a close look at the accused murderer, who he believes will kill again. In early 2024, police released a composite sketch of the suspect that was created using the security video and eyewitness statements. It's the biggest lead yet in both cases, which unfortunately remain unsolved. Authorities remain hopeful that someone will provide the information they need in order to solve the case. A $35,000 reward is being offered in exchange for tips that lead to the suspect's identification and arrest. 14. Leilson de Souza. 36-year-old Brazilian tour guide Leilson de Souza was leading tourists on a Sunday morning hike in November 2023 when he warned the group that it was going to rain. But the weather at Tijuca National Park in Rio de Janeiro was expected to change from one hour to the next. The hikers wanted to continue, so they continued along the planned route. Everything was going fine when the hikers heard a loud boom out of nowhere. De Souza had been struck by lightning while standing on a rock overlooking the landscape, bringing his 10-year tour guide career and his life to an abrupt end. A helicopter ambulance was dispatched to the site, but De Souza was dead by the time it arrived. The fallen hiking guide's brother, Leonardo Barros, told the Brazilian news outlet Globo that the family struggled to accept that D'Souza had been killed by lightning. It was the last thing they expected to happen, especially since it's a rare way to die. According to the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the odds of a person being struck by lightning are 1 in a million, and the vast majority of victims survive. In 2023, just 13 people in the United States died from lightning strikes, which is a very small percentage in a country with a population of 332 million. All things considered, D'Souza's death was truly a freak accident, and it was a sobering reminder that even if a person is highly unlikely to be struck by lightning, it's worth taking basic precautions to avoid. 13. Molly McLaren. University of Kent student Molly McLaren began dating Joshua Stimpton after they matched on Tinder in October 2016. The relationship lasted for nearly 2 years before Molly ended things in mid-2018. Unwilling to accept that it was over, Stimpson began stalking and harassing the young woman relentlessly. He posted derogatory messages and photos on social media and did other things to make Molly feel unsafe. Molly became so scared of her ex-boyfriend that she reported him to the police in North Kent and circulated photos of him to her neighbors so they knew to watch out for him. An officer called Stimpson and told him to leave Molly alone, but he didn't listen. The police spoke with Stimpson for a second time, but once again their warnings fell on deaf ears. Later that day, Stimpson bought a knife and a pickaxe at 2 separate stores. 2 days later, and just 12 days after the breakup, Stimpson entered the gym where Molly was exercising and began working out on a mat right next to her. Frustrated by his refusal to leave her alone, Molly confronted her ex and accused him of following her. Stimpson left the room, briefly returned to spy on Molly through a crack in the door, then went out into the parking lot carrying a bag containing his recently purchased weapons. As she left the gym after her workout, Molly sent a text message to her friends about how she felt like she was constantly looking over her shoulder due to her lurking ex. She also texted her mother, who called her up and instructed her to go to a safe place immediately. Just moments later, Stimpson stabbed Molly to death in a frenzied knife attack in the parking lot, plunging a knife into her head, neck, and body more than 75 times. A witness tried to pull Stimpson off of Molly, but he just kept on stabbing her with no apparent intention to stop. Prosecutors charged him with murder, while the defense argued for a manslaughter conviction, claiming the 26-year-old was less culpable for the crime due to his mental issues. Sadly, this wasn't the first time Stimpson psychotically pursued an ex-girlfriend. A few years later, a woman named Alexandra Dale had gone to the police repeatedly and begged for help escaping Stimpson's obsessed clutches. Following Molly's murder, Alexandra condemned law enforcement for not taking her complaints more seriously, which she believed may have prevented Molly's death. She also testified against Stimpson at his murder trial, making it clear that she believed he needed to be locked up for the sake of public safety. After deliberating for less than 3 hours, the jury found Stimpson guilty as charged. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 26 years. 12. Varon Raj Pusha. In 2022, a young man named Varon Raj Pusha moved from India to the United States to pursue a master's degree in computer programming at Valparaiso University. He planned to return to India after graduating, but never made it back there to see his loved ones again before his life was tragically cut short in October 2024. Varon was at a local Planet Fitness one morning when an assailant drove the blade of a knife into his head, puncturing his brainstem and causing injuries that the 24-year-old had almost no hope of recovering from. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors put him on life support and did everything they could to try saving him. But Varon never regained consciousness and ultimately succumbed to his injuries. The accused killer, 24-year-old Jordan Andrade, allegedly told police that he stabbed Varon because he believed the victim was going to assassinate him. He went on to say that he'd encountered Varon in the gym's massage room that morning and that he found the victim to be a little weird, despite admittedly not knowing him. After deciding in his own mind that Varon posed a threat to his safety, Andrade said he handled things the right way. At the same time, the suspect admitted that Varon did not instigate a confrontation in any way. Planet Fitness employees described Varon as a regular gym goer who kept to himself and wasn't creepy or threatening toward others in any way, calling Andrade's claims of self-defense even further into question. Andrade remains behind bars at the Porter County Jail on a pending murder charge. Shortly after his arrest, his attorneys filed for a mental health evaluation. According to news reports, Andrade had been diagnosed with severe mental health conditions in the past. It's unclear whether his history and his mental state during the crime will impact the case. 11. Sydney West. During the first months of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, 19-year-old University of California, Berkeley student Sydney West struggled to adjust to remote classes. Her struggles were compounded when she suffered a concussion, and she decided to take a break from school with plans to return later that year. In late September, Sydney took a rideshare to the Golden Gate Bridge and set out for a jog shortly before 7 o'clock a.m., just like she had many times before. But this time was different. After leaving for her morning run, the young woman vanished seemingly into thin air and hasn't been seen or heard from since. There were a lot of cars, bicycle riders and pedestrians on the bridge that morning, leading Sydney's parents to believe that someone must have seen what happened to her. They were shown the last known surveillance footage of their daughter, which has not been released to the public, and it's only left them more baffled. It was as if Sydney had disappeared into the fog that famously cloaks the bridge and never re-emerged. Shortly after the teen went missing, police told the public that she was considered at risk due to a history of depression. But more than 3 years have passed with no sign of Sydney, and the truth is that her fate and whereabouts are a complete mystery. Numerous suspected sightings of the young woman have been reported, but none of these claims have been substantiated. Sydney's family remains hopeful that investigators will encounter a break in the case that will lead them to long-awaited answers. 10. Eustasio Batista. Brazilian bodybuilder Eustasio Batista Dias gained widespread fame after winning the national championship in 2018. He went on to win the statewide championship in Sao Paulo the following year. The 27-year-old was working out at a gym in the city of Botucatu in October 2023 when 2 hitmen entered the building and ambushed him at gunpoint. They wasted no time shooting Batista repeatedly at point-blank range as he tried to escape and was fatally gunned down at the scene. Another gym-goer was grazed by a bullet and survived their injuries. By the time police arrived at the gym, the killers had fled the scene and were nowhere to be found. The horrifying act of violence was captured on surveillance footage, but the suspects reportedly remain at large. According to news reports, the hitmen managed to track Batista down through Instagram, where he regularly posted updates during his workouts at the gym. The killer's motives remain unclear. 9. Missy Beverly. On what began as a normal morning in 2016, 45-year-old mother of 3 and fitness instructor Terry Missy Beverly arrived bright and early at her church in Midlothian, Texas to set up for an exercise class she was scheduled to teach that day. About an hour later, around 5 o'clock a.m., the first students began to pour into the building. They were horrified to find Missy motionless on the floor and covered in multiple injuries, including a major head wound and multiple puncture wounds to the chest. First responders were unable to save Missy despite their best efforts, and police immediately began investigating her murder. Chilling surveillance footage showed a masked individual wandering around the building in riot gear, smashing glass and attempting to open doors, as if they were looking for someone. The individual was so well concealed that detectives were unable to determine whether they were a man or a woman. The case became a true whodunit, especially because Missy was an extremely well-liked member of her community. She didn't run in shady circles, have any enemies, or live a high-risk lifestyle that would have potentially put her in harm's way. Naturally, investigators looked at Missy's husband, Brandon, as a potential suspect. He also fell under scrutiny in the court of public opinion, with many people deciding that he must have killed his wife because they were having marital problems, even though he was out of town on a fishing trip at the time of the murder. Brandon steadfastly maintained his innocence, despite the financial issues and infidelity that were plaguing his marriage, and has never been charged in connection with Missy's death. Nearly everything surrounding the murder remains shrouded in mystery to this day, including the killer's identity and their motive. The only potential clues that could help identify the person in the surveillance video is their distinctive manner of walking, which police described as a slight limp, and the individual's estimated height, which is estimated at somewhere between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 foot 8. So far, the person's limp has only been useful in terms of ruling out potential suspects. In early 2024, Brandon Bevers sat down for his first interview in years as part of a renewed effort to bring attention to the case. Speaking with the Waxahachie Sun president Scott Brooks in a series of YouTube videos, Bevers said that he doesn't believe any law enforcement agency knows the killer's identity. He also speculated that Missy's murder was untargeted. As the case sits at a standstill, even after receiving help from the FBI, authorities remain hopeful that someone will come forward with information that will help solve the murder and bring Missy's killer to justice. 8. Suzanne Eaton. Born and raised in California, Suzanne Eaton found success as a scientist and professor of molecular biology at the prestigious Max Planck Institute in Dresden, Germany. In July of 2019, the 59-year-old traveled to Greece for a conference that was being held on the island of Crete. Suzanne was due to give a presentation during the event. When her colleagues realized that she was nowhere to be found on the day of her planned lecture, they contacted the authorities and a search effort was launched. After discovering Suzanne's cell phone and personal belongings in her hotel room, investigators theorized that she'd been abducted during her daily afternoon walk. 6 days later, a pair of volunteers discovered Suzanne's body 200 feet inside a cave that had been used as a bunker during World War II. An autopsy found that she had been strangled to death. Her attacker had also beaten her, leaving her with broken ribs and facial bones. Tire tracks outside the cave indicated that the killer had driven to the site and then dragged Suzanne inside, where they proceeded to brutally assault and kill her. Information gleaned from surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, and other evidence led investigators to 27-year-old Yanis Paraskakis. The married father of two lived in the town of Chania, where Suzanne had disappeared from. Upon being confronted with the evidence, Paraskakis confessed to ramming Suzanne with his car, knocking her unconscious, and then placing her in his trunk. Motivated by carnal desire and supposedly possessed by demons, he drove to the cave, dragged the unresponsive scientist inside, and assaulted her multiple times. He then threw her down a ventilation shaft, leaving her there to die while he went and cleaned his car of evidence. After being charged with Suzanne's murder, Paraskakis changed his story, claiming that his confession had been made under duress and that he'd accidentally run her over with his car. But the court didn't buy it, especially since more than 7 other women had come forward with claims that Paraskakis had tried to run them over with his car. These other victims testified that they survived thanks to nearby joggers who overheard their screams and rushed to their aid. Paraskakis was ultimately found guilty of Suzanne's murder and sentenced to life in prison. 7. Freak treadmill tragedies. In what was later described as a tragic freak accident, a 36-year-old mother of 4 named Delry Rosario died in July of 2023 after falling and hitting her head on a treadmill at a gym in Kent, Washington. Rosario's sister, Marissa Woods, told local station Kiro 7 that Rosario had tried to slow the machine down while they were exercising at LA Fitness. She missed a step, causing her to trip, fall, and slam her head against the apparatus. Woods said that she screamed for help because she didn't know how to perform CPR. She called the attention of fellow gym-goers who rushed over to help, but accused the employees of ignoring her pleas entirely as her sister lay dying on the floor. Sadly, Rosario never regained consciousness. She was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital, and her heart, lungs, kidneys, and liver were donated to 5 patients in need. Woods described Rosario as someone with a big heart who worked 2 jobs and did whatever it took to provide for her children. The family was devastated by her unexpected death, but proud that her organs helped save lives, which was a true reflection of the type of person that Rosario was. According to the US Consumer Product Safety Commission, thousands of people are hurt on treadmills every year. In fact, treadmill-related injuries account for the highest number of treadmill-related injuries that people experience at home. But deaths from treadmill-related injuries are extremely rare, with just 3 people dying every year on average from accidents on the machine. Prior to Rosario's death, the last major treadmill death to make news headlines in America happened 8 years earlier in 2015. Dave Goldberg, the CEO of SurveyMonkey and the husband of Facebook executive Sheryl Sandberg, fell and cracked his head open while exercising on a treadmill at a private resort in Mexico. He died from head trauma and blood loss after he happened to fall in the worst way possible. It was unclear what caused Goldberg to fall. It could have been something as simple as a slip or trip, according to sports medicine doctor Michael Janesco, or it might have been something as major as a heart attack. Speaking with Live Science, Janesco explained that most people who fall on treadmills hurt their ankle or leg, and then there are the unlucky few who hit their head. He recommended taking basic precautions to prevent the likelihood of this happening, including keeping the treadmill away from a wall, avoiding distractions, being familiar with the machine before going nuts on it, and only exercising at the intensity that a person is healthy enough to handle. 6. Geraldine Lar. For the most avid hikers, the Appalachian Trail is like a sacred rite of passage. Completing it requires a person to be in excellent shape, to have top-notch survival skills, and to be equipped with the mental strength required to complete the journey. And even then, things can still go wrong. During the spring of 2013, a 66-year-old retired nurse named Geraldine Lar set out on the Appalachian Trail with a friend. They began in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, and had trekked nearly 1,000 miles when Geraldine's friend had to cut her journey short in New Hampshire due to a family emergency. Geraldine continued on alone and made it to western Maine, where she became hopelessly lost less than 200 miles from the trail's northern end. With no phone service, her text messages to her husband went unreceived as she tried finding her way back to the trail, only to become even more confused and disoriented. She was in an especially rugged area, where stepping just 10 or 20 feet off course can easily cause a person to lose their way. This is precisely what happened to Geraldine, who wandered off the trail to use the bathroom. After failing to get back on track, she pitched her tent in the middle of the dense foliage and hoped someone would pass by overhead and see the silver blanket she'd tied between 2 trees. In her continued attempts to seek rescue, Geraldine searched for high ground and continued trying to text her husband. But she couldn't get a signal, and she couldn't find her way back to the trail, leaving her stranded in her tent and left with no choice but to hope someone found her. A search party was, in fact, underway, but they failed to find Geraldine. For more than 2 years, her family lived with the anguish of not knowing what had happened to her. Finally, in October 2015, her remains were found inside her tent. She had starved to death less than 2 miles from the trail after surviving for nearly a month on what little food and water she had with her. Geraldine thought she was much further off the trail than she actually was, and if she had known where to go, she could have gotten back to the trail in a half hour or less. During the weeks she spent awaiting rescue that never came, she kept journal entries about her experience, which grew noticeably more infrequent as she became increasingly weak from malnutrition. In a heartbreaking final entry, she wrote, "When you find my body, please call my husband George and my daughter Carrie." She knew she was dying and had mustered up enough strength to jot down her final goodbyes to her family. An official report revealed that Geraldine was ill-prepared to hike the trail alone. She tended to get flustered when she got lost, had a poor sense of direction, and didn't know how to use a compass. The tragedy is an unfortunate reminder of the importance of being thoroughly prepared for an undertaking as big as the Appalachian Trail, and knowing when to call it quits. 5. Tabias Cunningham. 23-year-old Tabias Cunningham had just finished a game of pickup basketball at an Esporta gym in Columbus, Ohio in March of 2023 and was waiting for another game to start when someone mercilessly gunned him down on the court. The young father died from his injuries, and police released surveillance footage which showed two persons of interest entering the gym. Investigators identified the suspected killer as 19-year-old Tabias Bush, who played against Cunningham in the basketball game that ended right before the shooting. According to court documents, Bush pulled a gun out of his hoodie pocket and shot Cunningham right as the next game was about to begin. He turned himself in shortly after being named as the accused gunman in the case and remains at the Franklin County Jail on a laundry list of pending charges. Bush faces 8 felony counts, including murder, aggravated murder, inducing panic resulting in injury, carrying a concealed firearm, and more, as well as a misdemeanor theft charge. 4. Lakan Riley. In February 2024, a 22-year-old nursing student named Lakan Riley went for a jog out the Augusta University campus in Athens, Georgia, and never returned. Her friend reported her missing, and she was found unresponsive in the woods later that day. Riley wasn't breathing, and her body was covered in blunt force injuries. The killer had fatally bludgeoned her in the head with such force that her skull was disfigured by the impact of the strike. Police arrested an undocumented immigrant from Venezuela named Jose Antonio Ibarra in connection with the crime. The 26-year-old is facing charges of murder, kidnapping, and assault. According to police, Ibarra entered the United States illegally 2 years prior to Riley's murder. The horrific act of violence added fuel to an already heated debate among Americans over the Biden administration's immigration policies. For the victim's family, this has only amounted to unwanted attention that they say has made them a target for people on both sides of the deeply divisive issue. Lakan's father, Jason Riley, told NBC News that he wished his daughter's death had not landed at the center of a political storm, which has made it difficult for the family to grieve. And while President Biden extended his condolences to Lakan's loved ones, Jason suspects that the tragedy is being used by politicians as a platform for promoting certain agendas and garnering votes. The young woman's murder inspired the authoring of a proposed bill in her name by U.S. Representative Mike Collins. And it doesn't get much more political than that, which essentially proves Jason Riley's point about the context in which his daughter's death is being used. Under the Lakan Riley Act, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement would be required to detain undocumented immigrants who commit shoplifting and other theft-related crimes. The pending legislation condemns the Biden-era catch-and-release border policy and calls for the reinstatement of the previous Remain in Mexico policy. It would also give state attorneys increased power to intervene when federal immigration policies harm a state or its citizens. For now, the bill remains up in the air, and the case against Ibarra is ongoing. 3. Lai Fei Huang. On a Sunday afternoon in February 2024, 22-year-old Li Fei Ada Huang embarked on a solo hike in the Mount Baldy area of California's San Gabriel Mountains. Unfortunately, her timing couldn't have been worse. That very same day, an atmospheric river dumped heavy rain and snow throughout the region. Ada sent photos and videos of the rough conditions to her friends and family and stopped responding to their messages a few hours later. Huang's loved ones became even more worried when she failed to return home by 11 p.m. that night. They reached the trailhead, but the search required professionals due to the inclement weather. Fearing the worst, but hoping for the best, they reported the young woman missing, but search efforts were impeded by heavy flooding and the risk of avalanches further up the mountain. 5 days after Ada disappeared, a civilian reported that they'd possibly spotted her body using their drone. The location was too perilous for rescuers to hike to at the time, and the winds were too high for them to carry out an aerial search. They stayed overnight and waited for conditions to improve. The next morning, the team hoisted medics down to the site. They found Ada's body right where the civilian drone operator had suspected it would be. Her cause of death has not been revealed, but it isn't uncommon for hikers to run into trouble on Mount Baldy, which is notorious for its treacherous conditions. According to USA Today, local enforcement has carried out over 100 search and rescue operations in recent years. More than 10 people have died on the mountain, including famous actor and mountaineer Julian Sands, who disappeared during a hike in early 2023 and was found dead months later. In addition to being time-consuming and expensive, these search missions put rescue workers in harm's way. Following the death of search and rescue veteran Tim Staples in 2019, the local sheriff began asking legislators to implement safety measures to prevent the need for so many rescue missions. It reflects a bigger problem throughout Southern California, where authorities struggle to keep up with the number of people who become stranded. Ada was used to hiking alone, according to her friends, but she may not have had much experience hiking in heavy rain and snow. In a region that's infamous for its unforgiving landscape, even the most seasoned hiker is taking risks by exploring nature alone, even on a perfectly clear day. The moral of the story: there's no such thing as being too careful in the wilderness, but it takes just one moment of lapsed judgment to end up in life-threatening danger. 2. Crushed by weights. In May of 2022, a customer entered a club fitness gym in St. Charles, Missouri, and found a young woman dead beneath some weights. Identified as 23-year-old Dolores Dolo Bochat, the ill-fated gym-goer's legs had fallen while she was using a Smith machine, leaving her fatally pinned beneath a barbell. She was the only person in the gym when the accident occurred at around 2:30 in the morning. Nearly a half hour passed before she was discovered, at which point it was far too late to save her life. The weight of the barbell had suffocated her to death. Dolores worked as an EMT for a local emergency services company. Just a week before her death, her squad had named her Paramedic of the Year. She was young and healthy, leading investigators to suspect that her fatal fall resulted from a loss of balance or because she overworked her legs and they gave out. Just a few months earlier, a 42-year-old woman experienced a similar accident at a gym in Mexico City when she lost control of a 400-pound barbell. The massive weight fell on top of the woman and crushed her neck, killing her right then and there as her horrified daughter looked on. Her spotter and other bystanders lifted the weight off the woman, but they were unfortunately unable to save her life. The tragedy serves as a disturbing reminder that even when you have a spotter, things can still go wrong sometimes, and the consequences can be deadly. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Stanislav Rosinski. It's common for people to share their locations on apps and social media platforms without thinking twice about the potential dangers to their safety. 42-year-old Russian submarine commander Stanislav Rosinski was no different, and his decision to throw caution to the wind may have cost him his life. The naval officer, who had formerly commanded a Black Sea Fleet submarine, had been reassigned to the mobilization department in Krasnodar, where he was tasked with conscripting Russian men to join in the war effort against Ukraine. He was on a routine early morning jog in July of 2023 when an assailant assassinated him using a pistol with a silencer. Investigators believe that the killer may have tracked the victim's movements through an app called Strava, where he was known to share his running routes. According to Russian media outlet Zargrad, the shooter meticulously planned out the crime ahead of time in order to avoid being captured on surveillance footage. The suspect lied in wait at a park where Rosinski was known to jog in and waited for the moment of opportunity to strike. After shooting Rosinski in the chest and back, the killer stealthily slipped away from the scene. Shortly after the murder, Russia's investigative committee announced that a 64-year-old suspect named Sergei Denisenko had been taken into custody. Russian forces stormed. During a search of the house, they found the pistol and silencer that they believe were used to kill Rosinski. Denisenko is suspected to have connections to Ukraine, which means that many people may not see him as the bad guy, given the widespread condemnation of Russia's actions over the last 2 years. But it could also be argued that taking a life is wrong, period, and that he should face the consequences for his alleged crimes.
10. Too much protein. Megan Heffert was 25 years old when she died from an overdose of protein. It wasn't that Megan pushed herself too far or ate way too much protein. It was that she had been building up her mass as a bodybuilder while suffering from a disorder that prevented her body from properly processing protein. Because her diet was filled to the brim with protein, her body had a meltdown. The condition is known as urea cycle disorder. Megan, already a mother to 2 children, didn't realize the danger she was putting herself in when she began preparing for a bodybuilding competition in Western Australia. She was gorging herself on a diet of egg whites, protein shakes, and other high-protein foods. She had also started going to the gym regularly, at least twice every day. Throughout all this conditioning, she had no idea that her body was dying. Here's how it works. Megan's body could not break down protein properly, which allowed ammonia to build up in her bloodstream. Ammonia is a waste product, the same product that causes fish tanks to die when there is too much fish poop in the water. This happened to her bloodstream, with ammonia poisoning her brain, leaving her dead just 1 day after doctors realized she had this very rare condition. She was sent to the hospital after being discovered unconscious on the floor of her apartment. By the next day, all brain activity had ceased and she was pronounced dead. 9. Constant sweating. A fitness influencer has died after taking her workout to a rather strange place. Bodybuilder Odyllis Santos Mina was fed up with constant sweating. As an extremely popular social media personality focusing on fitness, she hated that she was sweating all the time. It's odd to think about, but apparently in her mind it got in the way of her social media career. To correct this annoying natural feature of her body, she traveled to a Mexican clinic to get a procedure that would stop her from sweating in her armpits. Sadly for her, the procedure went awry. She suffered from cardiac arrest just after being anesthetized. Her family is now suing the clinic in Mexico for negligence. After her death, it was revealed that the clinic had actually paid the bodybuilder to promote the treatment to eliminate sweat glands. The clinic went out of their way to perform the operation on Odyllis, and they botched it. Odyllis' family is now saying the clinic didn't even have professionals on the scene to perform the surgery. The employee who applied the anesthesia wasn't even trained as an anesthesiast. According to the coroner's report, the death was caused by a combination of the anesthesia and a steroid-like medication that she was taking. In the clinic's defense, they say that Odyllis brought the death upon herself because she never told them about the medication that she was on. It mixed badly with the anesthesia and she had a heart attack and died right there on the table. Let that be a lesson to you. If you're going to get a medical procedure done, make sure the people who are performing it are qualified. 8. Dead in the locker room. A family in New Hampshire has sued Planet Fitness following the death of a woman in the gym's locker room. Emily Hamlin, just 22, had been working hard to stay fit, but when another member of the gym saw her collapse in the locker room, things went terribly wrong. The witness ran to the front desk, where she informed the male staff member that Emily was in trouble. But the staff member refused to do anything, saying it was against gym policy for him to walk into the women's locker room. He didn't even phone 911 right away. It wasn't until another staff member arrived at work that the police were phoned and anyone even bothered to check on the unconscious Emily. She had a weak pulse, and when police arrived nearly 30 minutes later, Emily was already dead. There are 2 issues here. First is that Emily was working out too much when she really shouldn't have been. She had an underlying heart condition that nobody knew about until her heart finally gave out after her early morning workout. Second, Emily's family is suing because they say if there had been a female staff member present, or if the male staff member had acted in a more timely fashion, their daughter might still be alive. 7. Fitness test fail. A 19-year-old Marine from New York named Tyrell J. Audan was in the middle of taking his physical fitness test at the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center in California when he suddenly collapsed. Tyrell was a recent graduate from high school. and had been an athlete his entire life. He was the definition of physically fit, but unfortunately he was also the latest candidate to drop dead during a military fitness test. According to his service record, Tyrell was attending communications electronics school with the Marine Corps when he died. But as for the cause of death, the Marines have yet to announce that to the public. All we know is that whatever he was doing during the test was so extreme that his body couldn't handle it and he died. Tyrell also isn't the first person this has happened to. Back in February, Midshipman 3rd Class Duke Carrillo, only 21 years old, collapsed halfway through his physical readiness test at the U.S. Naval Academy. He was only a sophomore, and his official cause of death has also not been released. It's still considered under review. Then there's the case last November when a petty officer died on a treadmill during his physical test at Fort Meade. The public doesn't know exactly what is happening to these guys for them to be dropping dead during their physical test, but it seems the branches of the U.S. military have taken fitness to a new level of danger. 6. Swept out to sea. A Russian fitness coach was washed out to sea when he tried to save a woman who was drowning. His name was Danil Gagarin, and his wife captured the entire thing on video. His wife, Daria, filmed Danil as he jumped into the rough waters near a Spanish resort to save the drowning woman. She then had to watch in horror as her own husband was carried out to sea, where he and the other woman both died. The woman who was drowning was also a fitness coach. She was Emma Mukkonen from Finland. She had jumped off a cliff at the Lazora Cove in Torrevieja, not understanding how dangerous the water was. Despite being in excellent shape, she just couldn't fight the raging sea. Daniil had to jump in to save her. He did manage to bring her up onto a rock sticking out of the water, but then a massive wave came in and swept them both out into the Mediterranean. All the physical fitness in the world couldn't save them from the wrath of Mother Nature. Sadly, Emma's body was recovered way out at sea that day, while Denis wasn't found for another 24 hours. According to the New York Post, both victims were working together at a fitness center on Costa Blanca. Apparently, Emma was a bit of an adrenaline junkie, which is why she made the dangerous jump in the first place. What do you think about this crazy situation? Do you think these people had some kind of superhero complex, thinking they were invincible because they were in such good shape? Or is this just a case of daredevil antics gone wrong? Let us know in the comments. Then, if you like intense videos like this one, be sure to subscribe. 5. Indoor climbing fail. In Colorado, a woman recently plummeted 40 feet, 13 meters to her death. This didn't happen while scaling a mountain or walking precariously along the edge of a cliff. Instead, it happened at an indoor climbing gym. According to Fort Collins Police, the woman was at Ascent Studio Climbing and Fitness when she became detached from her safety system. The investigators didn't find that the equipment was faulty, but she nonetheless somehow became disconnected from the harness. So when she was at 40 feet, 13 meters above the floor, and let go of the wall, rather than gliding gently to the ground, she fell backwards and landed on her head. The investigation is still ongoing, with experts saying indoor climbing gym accidents are incredibly rare. There have only been a handful in the last decade, with the previous one being in 2014 when a man had a similar incident in which he let go of the wall and fell to his death. In these cases, it doesn't matter how fit you are. The ground will always win when you hit it at terminal velocity. 4. The most intense bike class. They say not enough exercise can kill, and whoever says that is completely right. Just ask the woman who didn't exercise for a year and almost died when she attended an indoor cycling class. She went an entire year without running, speed walking, exercising, or doing anything overly physical. But enough was enough. She took herself to the indoor cycling class to get back on the old horse. After the class, she had extremely sore muscles. At the time, she thought it was normal. After all, she hadn't used her legs that extensively in quite some time. But the pain didn't go away. It got worse. After 3 days, her legs were in excruciating pain and she began to have extremely discolored urine. She compared her urine to Pepsi because it was so dark. But she was so embarrassed that she didn't want to go to the hospital. Instead, she phoned a medical helpline. But the helpline wasn't much help, as she was told that a doctor would call her back maybe in around 8 hours. So she sucked it up and went to the hospital. As it turned out, she had acute kidney damage and something called rhabdomyolysis. If she hadn't gone to the hospital when she did, she would have had renal failure and been on dialysis for the remainder of her life. How did all this happen? She was informed by doctors that because she hadn't exercised for so long and went straight into the most intense workout possible, her body went into shock. Extreme muscle strain caused her kidneys to almost fail, which would have left her seriously ill for the rest of her life. 3. Caffeine toxicity. A 29-year-old personal trainer died after drinking a pre-workout shake. That's because this shake happened to contain somewhere around 200 times more caffeine than what you find in a traditional cup of coffee. Thomas Mansfield was in extremely great shape. He was also a father to 2 children living in the small town of Colwyn Bay in Wales. Before he went to do his workout, he mixed his ordinary workout shake with some extra pre-workout powder. But within minutes, he complained that his heart was racing and he felt sick. He then collapsed in front of his wife, was rushed to the hospital, and died there in the emergency waiting room. An inquest found that he had ingested 5 times the fatal level of caffeine. This meant his death was ruled as caffeine toxicity. How it happened is beyond anyone's understanding. His pre-workout powder shouldn't have contained more than 150 milligrams of caffeine, yet it contained hundreds of times more than that. He didn't mix any more than he usually did. He didn't use anything he hadn't used before. Investigators are still trying to figure out how all that caffeine got into his powder. To be honest, it almost seems as though pure caffeine was put into the powder container by someone who knew an overdose would kill him. But as of right now, there's no proof that that's exactly what happened. 2. Deadly Treadmill. Dave Goldberg was the CEO of SurveyMonkey and the husband of Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook COO. He was worth millions, and like many young, successful millionaires, he was in fantastic shape. He frequently used his treadmill to keep his heart good and strong, but when he was on vacation with his family in Mexico and decided to hop on the treadmill, it proved to be the last thing he would ever do. He fell off the treadmill, cracked his head on the ground, and died from hypovolemic shock. This is when large amounts of blood and fluid are lost from the brain. Basically, he hit his head so hard that it cracked open and all his brain fluid leaked out. For all his millions of dollars, there was nothing anybody could do to save him. According to CNN, this isn't even that rare. Between 2003 and 2012, there were 30 deaths caused by treadmills. In fact, Mike Tyson, the famous boxer, well, his 4-year-old daughter was killed when she accidentally got strangled by a cord connected to a treadmill. And it wasn't even running at the time. 1. Slipped barbell. It may seem impressive to be able to bench 315 pounds, but absolutely nobody is impressed when the barbell slips and crushes your neck. Tragically, this is what happened to Kyle Thompson, just 22 years old. He was at the Elite Edge Transformation Center in Iowa, bench pressing 315 pounds, 140 kilograms. But in a freak accident, the barbell slipped out of his hands, fell on his neck, and left him gasping for air. Kyle was quickly taken to a hospital in Des Moines, but there was nothing they could do to save him. After all, he took 315 pounds of steel straight to his trachea. Imagine getting punched in the neck by a train. That's basically what happened to him. And to make it even more shocking, he had been working out with a spotter. Even the spotter couldn't stop the barbell from hitting Kyle's neck. And if you thought treadmills were dangerous, just listen to these statistics. According to the Center for Injury Research and Policy, between 1990 and 2007, no less than 1 million Americans had to be treated in the emergency room for injuries due to weight training. During that time, 114 people died just trying to lift weights.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather go 2 months without exercising due to an injury or suffer the embarrassment of accidentally breaking a brand new machine at the gym? Let us know in the comments below and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.